Hello friends, Mark Johnson here. Welcome back to another episode of the TRIRIGA War Room where experts advise. Hello friends, Mark Johnson here. In today's episode, we're going to talk about portfolio data. We need to load some portfolio data coming up for our continued development. So before we get to that point of actually loading the data, we should talk about, well, what is the portfolio data? What is it used for? Why is it needed? Why is it important? And that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and jump right in and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and log into my environment. So quite simply, portfolio data is the common data in TRIRIGA, which is accessible to all the different locations. Now, if you were to go out and Google search it and look it up in the IBM documentation, you'd see something like this here, right? That the portfolio consists of about the organizations, locations, people, and assets, right? So it really only going to list off 4 things there, but it is actually more than 4 things, right? Because the locations, right, that includes your location hierarchy as well as your geography. So we're going to go into each of these things and we'll kind of discuss them a little bit, kind of give a high level overview and understanding of the portfolio data, how it's used, how it's organized, that sort of thing. So and then on our next episode, we're going to start actually loading in some of that portfolio data. So again, this is the data that is in use throughout the system, right? So the easiest way to think about the portfolio data, it's the people, places, and things of TRIRIGA, right? That's what the applications are all running against. So people's kind of self-explanatory, right? Organizations, that would be kind of part of the things, or people, right? Corporations are legally treated as entities. Asset records, right? So all the different assets that a company may own, right? The locations of those assets, the people have access to those assets, the department or division or whatever, the breakdown of that organization, where those assets belong, right? All those things describe portfolio data. Now, I would also argue things like your classifications and your lists, right, are part of that data as well, right? Because they're available and for use by all of the applications in the system. Now, we've already covered some of that in the videos on the creation of classification and the creation of lists. So we will discuss the portfolio data and then we will start creating the portfolio data. Now, not all TRIRIGA implementations use all of the different portfolio data, right? Some organizations will keep track of people records. Some don't. Some keep track of assets. Some don't. Some keep track of locations. Some don't. It just depends on how it's being used. Now, one big and important thing when it comes to the portfolio data is the organization and the location, right? Those become essential for use in security, right? You can have organization hierarchy-based security as well as geography-based security, so you can limit the access that somebody has to certain record data based off of their organization and their location, right? So the other thing is when you create people records, right? Well, whatever the organization and the geography of that person's profile record that's creating the new records, generally in TRIRIGA, the new records are going to inherit that, right? So it plays a part in it, and for security this makes sense, right? Because if somebody can create the record, then they should be able to have access to it, right? And if you're using organization-based security or geography-based security, right, it would make sense that you would initially give it the security of the person that created it. So let's go ahead and we'll start off and we'll talk about organizations, right? So your organization hierarchy, right, it's going to provide different forms to help process and track and manage the various organizations within a company, right? And so there could be also any number of external companies for companies that you interact with and deal with that may provide services to you, or maybe are even a co-tenant inside of a retail location. And sometimes you need to track information about them. So there's, within this hierarchy, the ability to track both your own internal structure as well as to have information about external structures. So probably the easiest way to kind of start describing some of this is just, let's go to the form builder. All right. So we want to go, we're going to talk about organization first. So we'll go over here to organization. So you can see, right, we have all these different forms for organization, and there is only one single business object, right? Now, this is a hierarchy module. So there is a hierarchy that's in place. But let's just start here at the top, and we'll work our way down the list, and we'll just kind of describe the different forms, right? So the agency form, right, it's used to represent, government agencies, right, organization structure. And so, the agency is, it's, recursive, right? You can have agencies underneath agencies, underneath agencies, underneath agencies, right? So you can have all kinds of sub-agencies and everything else. And the agencies are generally designed to go underneath of government. So the tri-government would be kind of the top level, and then the agencies would be underneath it. For most regular organizations, you're going to start with the department and the division, right? So the department is used to represent your company's organization structure, and it is also recursive, so you can have departments and sub-departments and that sort of stuff. The division is used to represent the company organization also. So you can have divisions, right? And the divisions contain multiple departments. Now I will go ahead and I will bring up a diagram here for you and just kind of show you what this all looks like. Oops, too big. Let's go ahead and we'll snap that in place over here. Okay, so you can see at the organization, because this is a hierarchy, there's an organization root node. So that's what this is here. So underneath that organization root node, you could have an external company, and then you could also have external companies underneath them, right? Or you could have the government record, right? And then underneath government records, you can have one or more layers of agency records. The most common use that you'll see is a My Company record. So you have your organization root node, then you'd have your My Company record, but you can have multiple My Company records, right? It is recursive. And then underneath the My Company records, you can have department records, right? Or you can have a division and then have departments under them, right? So all this recursion really is defined by the include. So if you recall, when we built our classification, there's a special type of association called an include, and that include identified the type of records that could be created at that level of the hierarchy. So that's what determines what can be created and kind of gives us this breakdown structure. Although there's no diagrams or anything like this within TRIRIGA for you to kind of see and visualize and understand the tree nature, right? You can have proposed companies, right? And then you can have, sub-proposed companies, right? And then underneath proposed companies, you can either go directly with departments and have a bunch of sub-departments, or you can do a My Company and have, recursive My Companies. You can have work groups, multiple work groups, organization category, right? Then with the low organization category, you've got the full list again, right? So under organization category, you can have external companies, government records, My Company records, proposed company records, work groups, and then more organizational categories. All right, so let's pop this guy out of the way, and we'll come back here. So you can see again, here's the different forms: the My Company, the organization category, the proposed company, the work group, right? So the external company form, that's kind of where we left off, right? So it is used to manage information related to your external vendors, partners, co-tenants, that kind of thing. We've talked about government already. Um, the My Company form. So the My Company form, it's used to create a record that represents your company. And if the company has a subsidiary companies under other related legal entities, you can also create My Company records for those as child records to the top level. Again, it's hierarchy, right? Um, and then generally, what you find is usually you have a My Company, and then you'll have multiple dependents, divisions, or departments underneath those, right? So the organizational category records they're typically not used to represent an actual physical organization, right? But it's used to like group organizations of a particular type. So they're useful for helping to organize the hierarchy view, right? So you could create organizational category records for things like the external contacts and work groups and proposed companies, and then add those organization records underneath that organizational category, right? So it's kind of like a housekeeping order, keeping your hierarchy well organized and easy to find the data that's in it, right? Because for large companies, right, there's lots of divisions in that organizational structure, and you want to be able to find the information you're looking for as easy as possible. So the proposed company form, right, it's primarily used in the real estate lease application to indicate a company that is a contact for an uncompleted real estate transaction project. So, but you could use it to represent, any organization, right? Just because it was created with a specific purpose doesn't necessarily mean you can't use it for another one, although it's generally best to try and stick with it. And you can see too here based off of the object label, right? These things don't really change and haven't been updated, right, since 10.5, since probably even before 10.5. It's just when they got the object labels. So there's been a few changes to these over the year, right? So all right, that just about covers up the organization hierarchy. So this is a clean install. We don't have any data in the system, but we will here. We will here soon. But just so you can see, well, how would I access this data, right? Where is the portfolio data? So if you come to your menu, and then under portfolio, we have access, right? So here it is: locations, organizations, people, and assets, right? So organizations. And here's our organization tree. So there's a default work group, and then there's the organization root node. So if I click at the organization root node and I click in new, right, here's the different things that I can create, right? And so this corresponds with that diagram that I showed you of what can be created at what level. And again, these are defined by the includes, right? Specifically, the includes that are on the form are what show up here. So always make sure that you have the right names and the right values inside your includes, otherwise you can get lost. But that's organization. So the other hierarchies are accessed the same way, right? We can come over and we can go to locations, right? And again, there's no data here. So if I click on location, there's nothing, right? No data to display. So what the location does is the location hierarchy gives us a way to track and manage the locations that are belong to or are managed by our organization or organization's customers or company, right? And again, it is also a hierarchy, and so there's different types of objects that you can build at that level of the hierarchy. Now, the location hierarchy is different from the organization hierarchy in the way, so let's go to the forms, and then this will show it better. So for the organization hierarchy, everything was all the same business object, but you can see for our location hierarchy, right, we have different business objects, right, and different forms for those objects. but it also has a diagram here, right? So you can see the location, right? This one's a little more, it's a little more busy, a little more cluttered, but you can see, right, under locations, you can have location categories, or retail centers. So under the location categories, right, then there's the buildings. So again, the categories are there to help you organize and categorize the data to keep it ordered and easy to find the information that you want. So we can have a building directly off of our location route node. It doesn't have to be on a property, although you have the ability to do that, right? Under property, then you can have building. So typically you would see, potentially a property, and then under that property you might have land, you might have some buildings, you might have structures, right? But the building is pretty easy to understand. So buildings have floors, and floors have spaces, right? And then you can actually have spaces inside of spaces. And then there's also vertical shafts, which are not part of floors or spaces. External retail locations have floors and vertical shafts. There can be land, right? And we talked about property. You have proposed retail locations, proposed sites, actual retail centers, retail locations, and structures, right? And structures, if you recall, the structure, it has the same BO as building, it's just a different form. So it is similar that it has floors and vertical shaft, but you see nothing on space here, right? So this is kind of what the hierarchy looks like for the location manager. And again, this is all defined by the include. So you can, you could customize and change this if need be, but I don't know why you would. All right, so let's discuss these a little bit more. So, buildings, right, can have, generally have a physical street address, and they can have a GIS identifier, so you can have the maps and pull up the detail. The external retail locations, right, it's a section or a part of a retail center, and it's, usually most specifically, ones that are not owned by your company. Obviously, floors are kind of self-explanatory. So land. So the land location, again, is recursive, and it's to help represent land parcels or construction plots for the real estate or capital projects applications that are inside of TRIRIGA. Location category is typically not representing an actual physical location, and it's used for grouping and organization, right? Plan for, just kind of like the name says, right? It's used to design, planned movements. It's mainly for like space management, right? So it's used to for design change requests when you need to restructure the floor plan in order to do your move management. And same thing for the space, right? Those are part of primarily used by the move management application. Property is a location that contains, one or multiple buildings, structures, or lands, right? Or you kind of think of like a corporate campus might. The proposed retail location, it's used by the real estate transactions to represent a future retail location that is being evaluated to be added to the portfolio. The proposed site is similar. It's used by the real estate transaction application to represent a future building that's being evaluated to be added to the portfolio. A retail center is a location that contains an external retail and retail locations, with the retail location being just a part of a retail center, specifically more for ones that are owned by your actual organization or company. Spaces are kind of self-explanatory, and then a space group, right, is it's just used like the name implies, right? It's used to group spaces together. So we do have a few more forms here. So since this is defaulting to just 20, let's go ahead and bump this to 50. Structure, right? So um, structures are generally used to indicate, kind of like buildings, but they're not occupied, right? But it still may have a physical street address or identifier, a GIS identifier. And then the vertical shaft is just within a building, any space that spans more than one floor, right? So that is location, and so part of location is our geography, right? And so the geography, it should be pretty self-explanatory. Let's go ahead and pop this over here so you can see again hierarchy, right? So under geography you have world regions, and then under world regions you have countries, and then underneath country you can have directly a city, or you can have a metropolitan area or a region, and then inside that region you can have a city or a metropolitan area or a state province, or even directly underneath the country you can have the state province, and then city, and then country, and then the metropolitan area. So your location portfolio data is really a combination of the location hierarchy and the geography hierarchy, right? So all right, I have a building or I have a property, but where is that property located in the world? So the geography will be the first portfolio data that we're going to load into the system. It's the least kind of dependent of the data, right? So an organization um, probably be next, but we'll see as we get there, right? Because organizations are going to have an address, right? So that means they need locations, but locations also belong to organizations. So there is some kind of cross dependency there. So we'll just have to pick one to load. Probably we'll go with the organization just because of the whole organization and geography um, based security that's able to be there. It makes sense to, if we do those two and then add in the other portfolio data, right? So people, right? People are going to belong to organizations. They're going to have locations where they sit in. Those locations are going to be in a geographical location. So same sort of thing with assets. Those assets are going to belong to either people or organizations. They're going to have locations within, buildings, and then those buildings are located in, cities. So when you're loading data and you're loading in a hierarchy, you always have to be aware that you're paying attention to the hierarchy level, and you load the records one level at a time. You start with the top level hierarchy, and then you work your way down the hierarchy as you load levels so that the parent records are always there. Because if you try to load, say, a country without the world region being there, you're going to end up with the country probably actually instead of underneath the geography root node, you end up with it parallel to the root node. Your data will be misloaded, and that can cause you problems and issues with your hierarchy, especially if you're using the geography-based security. All right, so that describes the geography. So we'll go ahead and we'll get this guy out of the way. All right. The next part is the people. So we've talked about locations, we've talked about organizations, we've talked about geography, although we didn't really discuss these that much, but I think it's, for the most part, pretty straightforward. Most people understand what geography is. So the next thing is going to be the people. So if we come down here to try people, So we can see just based off of the forms, right? We have alt people, alt employee, we've got consultants, employees, external contacts, and drive people templates. So let's see, what should we start with first? All right, let's start with the most common. It's gonna make sense for a company, right? The employee. What are the employees, right? So they're individuals that are within the company that you need to track within TRIRIGA. Now, for all these people, whether they're employees or external contacts or consultants, right, you have the ability to grant them the permission to log into TRIRIGA or not. So for any of these people, if you're going to set them up to log into TRIRIGA, then you're going to create a My Profile record for those individuals. If they're not set up to log into TRIRIGA, then they're not going to have a My Profile record. So you can track people and have people in the system that may never log into TRIRIGA, right? So, because part of people management is is having those people available in there because maybe somebody is responsible um, or is a point of contact for something, but they're never going to be logging into your TRIRIGA. But you need to track them and record that, hey, they're the person that's responsible for this, so that you can have their contact information in there, so that you can have that on the record. So you can have employees, again, they may or may not be TRIRIGA users. So consultants are generally individuals from outside the company that you need to track. Right? And they could be assigned spaces within your location hierarchy as they work on projects, right? This is where I fall most of the time as the consultant, right? External contacts, right? So these are individuals that are generally outside of the company that you need to track, right? TRIRIGA really only tracks their contact information and credentials required to work with them. So again, they may or may not be TRIRIGA users. So you could have, for example, vendors, right, that perform services for your company, and you want to keep track of those companies and the people that are in them, right? So the external contact, so that you say, hey, you know what, I've got broken window, I need it replaced. Who's my vendor that takes care of our glass? Or who's the janitorial service or the plumber service because we've got a toilet that's overflowing, that kind of thing. All right, so there are a couple alternate forms here, and what the alternate forms are for is you have the ability to print a form in TRIRIGA and print out all of its data. But the forms as they are, so for instance, the people form, right? You can have lots of tabs and sections and everything else, and it's not always laid out the best for a print layout, right? It's laid out for easier consumption with on the screen. So there's the desire to be able to print out data that's in some of these forms, but you may only want a smaller subset of the data, or you want to have it rearranged in a way that is more conducive or friendly for printing. And so because of that, you have the ability to set basically an alternate form. And so if we look here on the try employee form and we scroll down in its properties, the alternate print form is try alt people, which is this form here. Right, so you can see, right, this is stripped down, it's got less details, right, there's only a few of the different sections. But anyways, that's what these alt forms are for. They're for printing, and you have the ability to create alternate print forms as well, so that you can organize them and put them into the way that you need. All right, so this is the people on the portfolio. So the people are not a hierarchy, but you do have access to the people, so you can come and you can click and see just the These are just queries basically that filter based off of the type of form. So whether it's consultant or employee, external contact. And then the other part of our portfolio data is assets, right? So you can see there's lots of different types of assets and then specifications here too. Right? So we're not going to create any assets. I don't anticipate we're going to create any. Not a lot of companies actually track assets in here. It just depends on which applications within TRIRIGA that they're using on whether they're going to have assets or not. Some certainly do. All right, so our people, our assets, our organization, geography, location, right? Those are generally the portfolio data, right? And then all of the other applications within TRIRIGA uses the same set of data, right? You don't create separate people records for a real estate lease and then separate people records for the capital project. Generally, when you're doing an implementation, the portfolio data is the first stuff you do and you work on and you get loaded into the system because all the applications require the portfolio data. Right? How do you test security? You know if a particular role has access to something or not if you don't have the organizations and the geographies there. And if you don't have the people records for the people created, right? You need to have users set up. So that's still one thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to set up users. Been doing everything as the system user, which isn't really the best practice. We will get to the point that I will create an employee record that has admin level access for doing my development and other things. But I wanted to wait to show that until I got to this point here on the portfolio data so that I could go through it and explain it and show it to you. You can see, right, we have no data. We have the ability to click add and we can add data. So you can manually go in and create records and manually fill out this information, or you can create the portfolio data or load the portfolio data into the system using some of the different tools like integration object, data integrator, that sort of thing. So we will actually get to do that here in the next video. So that concludes our portfolio data. All right, friends, that wraps up another episode of the TRIRIGA War Room. Thank you for watching this episode. If you like these videos and you find them helpful, please do like and subscribe to the channel. Your subscriptions are the only way that I have to know if you find these videos helpful and if I should continue to make them or not. I do these videos on my own time. I'm not currently compensated in any way for them. So if they're not helpful, I'd much rather go and work on some of my other side projects. So here at the TRIRIGA War Room, we really do want to be your expert advisors and to help you to better implement and use TRIRIGA. So if you have any ideas for future videos, or even if you would like to, guest instruct a future video, please do let me know. Again, thanks for watching. We look forward to seeing you next time.